You love the dark stories they don't want told? Smash that subscribe button, hit like, and drop a comment, because once you step inside this place, silence becomes a weapon. The sirens echoed through the Appalachian Mountains, bouncing off rock and pine as rain hammered the windshield. At 2:19 a.m., a state trooper lost control on a sharp bend, his cruiser fishtailing before grinding to a halt inches from the guardrail. Ahead of him, illuminated by flashing lights, lay a body twisted unnaturally against the wet asphalt. The man was face down. His hands were cuffed behind his back, and those cuffs were the first thing everyone noticed. Not civilian, not county-issued. These were Department of Corrections restraints, the kind used only inside prison walls. The victim's jacket clung to him, heavy with rain and blood, the fabric torn at the shoulder as if he'd been dragged. His name was Caleb Mercer, age 34, a senior transport officer assigned to Red Onion State Prison. Red Onion wasn't just a prison. It was a dead zone. A place buried deep in the mountains where sound didn't travel and questions weren't asked. The men sent there were considered beyond control, too violent, too influential, too dangerous for anywhere else. And once you worked there long enough, the silence followed you home. By the time Detective Lena Crow arrived, dawn was bleeding faint gray into the sky. She stepped out of her car, boots crunching on gravel, her eyes immediately drawn to Mercer's cuffed wrists. She'd worked homicide for 13 years, but prison-related deaths always carried a different weight. They came wrapped in policy, secrecy, and a long list of people who didn't want the truth exposed. Crow knelt beside the body. Mercer's knuckles were split and swollen. Defensive wounds? His jaw was bruised, one eye nearly sealed shut. He'd been beaten, restrained, and transported here alive, then dumped like evidence someone forgot to destroy. In Mercer's pocket, a folded piece of paper was found, its edges soaked but the ink still visible. Crow read it once. Then again. They don't leave Red Onion. No name, no explanation. The warden called within the hour. Calm, polite, dismissive. Mercer, he said, had ended his shift at 4:00 p.m. He wasn't scheduled for any night transfers. According to official records, Mercer never re-entered the facility. But cameras don't lie unless someone makes them. Security footage showed Mercer's truck approaching the outer gate at 11:38 p.m. The barrier lifted. His vehicle rolled forward. Then, at exactly 11:41 p.m., the feed cut to static for just over 3 minutes. When the image returned, the truck was gone. Inside Red Onion, every door opened and closed on a digital log. Every hallway had eyes. Yet after that moment, Mercer vanished from the system as if he'd never existed. Crow requested access to internal surveillance logs. The request was denied. That refusal turned suspicion into certainty. Crow dug into Mercer's recent activity. Over the past 6 weeks, he'd volunteered for late-night duty, often without backup. Fellow officers described him as tense, distracted. One recalled Mercer asking about camera blind spots, claiming it was just a technical curiosity. Another mentioned a heated argument with a veteran guard named Grant Holloway. Voices were raised. Threats implied. No report was ever filed. Then, Crow found the inmate file. 3 days before his death, Mercer accessed restricted records belonging to Isaiah Boone. Inmate number 69,017. Boone was serving multiple life sentences. His file was sealed, viewable only by commando-level staff. Mercer had opened it twice. Crow scheduled an interview. Boone was escorted into the room in shackles, his movements calm, controlled. He sat across the glass and studied Crow like he already knew how the conversation would end. "You're here because the quiet man stopped breathing," Boone said. Crow didn't blink. "You knew Caleb Mercer?" Boone nodded slightly. "He wasn't supposed to talk to me. That's what made him interesting." "What did he want?" she asked. "The truth," Boone replied. "And the truth is expensive in places like Red Onion." Boone claimed Mercer had asked about inmates who'd been transferred, but never showed up in other facilities. Men who vanished from records entirely. He was scared, Boone said. Scared enough to break rules. That evening, an anonymous email arrived in Crow's inbox. No sender, no subject, just a scanned image. It was a map. A lower-level blueprint of Red Onion areas, not included in any official documentation. One corridor was circled in red. Beneath it, a single line of text. Service Passage, D. When Crow confronted the administration, she was met with blank stares and tight smiles. The corridor, she was told, didn't exist. She was advised firmly to stop digging. Instead, she went deeper. Crow parked on a ridge overlooking the prison. Red Onion glowed below her, floodlights cutting sharp shadows against concrete walls. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. If you want answers, don't trust the uniforms. Another message followed. They hid it under D. The next morning, armed with a court order and a visibly nervous escort, Crow descended below the known levels of Red Onion. The air turned colder, heavier, carrying a metallic scent that didn't belong. At the end of an unlisted passage stood a steel door with no label, no camera, no digital record. Service Passage D. The escort hesitated before unlocking it. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was small, windowless, and wrong. Bolted to the floor sat a restraint chair, stained dark with age and neglect. The walls were scarred, scratched by fingernails. And above the chair, carved deep into the concrete, were the words, "They don't leave." And beneath them, smaller, shakier, was a name that made Crow's breath catch. Caleb Mercer. The door to Service Passage D slammed shut behind Detective Lena Crow, its clang echoing in the dead air. The corrections officer escorting her wouldn't meet her eyes. This room felt wrong, sealed off from time itself. Crow's flashlight danced across a lone restraint chair, its surface marred by dark, rust-colored stains and gouges in the concrete floor. This wasn't some forgotten storage closet. It was a place designed to make people disappear. "Who authorized this room?" she demanded. The escort just swallowed, claiming he'd never been down here. Crow didn't believe him, but she believed his fear. Her investigation was stonewalled from the start. The official story? Structural hazards. The administration promised an internal review, a classic tactic to bury the truth until everyone forgot. So Crow documented everything herself: the chair, the strange carvings on the walls, the conspicuous absence of cameras. Back in her car, a text lit up her phone from an anonymous number. "You saw it? Now understand why he died." It was about Caleb Mercer, the corrections officer whose death brought her here. She raced back to her office, locking the door, when another message arrived. This time, it was a photo. Blurry, but unmistakable. Caleb Mercer, alive, strapped into that very restraint chair. The timestamp was 11:44 p.m., just 3 minutes after the prison's security cameras mysteriously went dark. His face was swollen, his eyes wide, staring at something or someone just out of frame. The metadata on the photo was a dead end. Whoever sent this was a ghost. By morning, the story had leaked. A dead officer, a secret room, whispers of abuse inside Red Onion, America's most secure Supermax prison. News vans swarmed the entrance. The warden called the allegations fabrications. The guards' union accused Crow of a witch hunt. And then, the first piece of evidence vanished. When Crow returned with a warrant for Service Passage D, the steel door was gone. In its place stood a fresh concrete wall, still damp. The room had been erased overnight. "Maintenance," her escort mumbled. But maintenance doesn't wall up rooms. Crow dug into Mercer's finances. He'd been receiving small, untraceable cash deposits, not enough to raise alarms, but enough to be suspicious. The money trail led to a shell company involved in prison supply contracts and a shadowy transport firm with no office and no clients. She then met with Mercer's sister, Rachel, who said Caleb had grown paranoid. He spoke of off-book transfers, of men being moved without paperwork, disappearing from the system. He said Red Onion wasn't the last stop, Rachel whispered. He said it was the eraser. From a closet, Rachel pulled a shoebox filled with Caleb's handwritten notes. Dates, badge numbers, license plates, and one phrase, scribbled over and over: D Passage, active. The notes contained a list of inmate IDs. Crow cross-referenced them, and a chilling pattern emerged. Every man on that list was officially recorded as transferred out of Red Onion, but none of them ever arrived at another facility. They had simply vanished. Crow went back to the prison to see an inmate named Isaiah Boone. This time, he was ready to talk. "They moved someone last night," he said before she could even ask. "Chains, wheels, then nothing." Crow showed him the photo of Mercer in the chair. Boone's jaw tightened. He explained that D Passage was a process. Problem inmates, witnesses, anyone who was a liability, they were taken to that room, interrogated, then handed over to private contractors, disguised as an emergency transfer. Off the books, out of the system. Red Onion keeps its numbers clean, Boone said. No deaths, no scandals. Just silence. That night, Crow's apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but her files, the shoebox, the photos, all her backups were gone. On her kitchen counter sat a single pair of Department of Corrections handcuffs with a note attached. Walk away. She refused. She tried to escalate the case to a federal colleague, but he was suddenly reassigned. Then, Grant Holloway, a veteran guard Mercer had argued with, went missing. His car was found abandoned, and hidden inside was a phone with a video file. The shaky footage showed Service Passage D before it was sealed. It showed a group of guards, the restraint chair, and in the background, the warden himself. The video cut off abruptly. This was the proof she needed. As she uploaded the file to secure servers, her phone rang. Unknown number. You should stop, a calm voice warned. Caleb didn't. The line went dead. Just then, a news alert flashed on her screen. Inmate found dead during transfer. The inmate was Isaiah Boone. The official cause of death was complications. The time of death, 11:41 p.m. The exact time the cameras always went dark. The system wasn't just broken, it was hunting her. And she was running out of time. Isaiah Boone's death was big news for exactly 12 hours. By morning, it was gone, buried under weather reports and celebrity gossip. The official statement was clean, rehearsed, and totally empty. A medical emergency during transport. No mention of the timing. No mention of Service Passage D, and definitely no mention of the camera outages that seemed to swallow men whole. Detective Lena Crow stared at the alert on her phone, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. Boone was alive less than a day ago, warning her that someone was being moved. Now he was gone. Another voice silenced before it could testify. They weren't just cleaning up loose ends anymore. They were accelerating. Crow drove with no destination, just looping through back roads, checking her mirrors every few seconds. Her apartment was compromised. Her office wasn't safe. The department had gone silent around her. Colleagues were suddenly unavailable, and all her calls went straight to voicemail. She was still officially on the case, but she was completely isolated. That's when she understood the real danger. This wasn't just corruption. It was infrastructure. She pulled into a rest stop miles from town, opened her laptop, and connected to the public Wi-Fi. The video from Grant Holloway's phone was already backed up to 3 encrypted servers. One of them was even set to auto-release if she missed a check-in window. Insurance. She replayed the footage. Slower this time. The men in uniform. The restraint chair. The way the room felt so operational, so practiced, not improvised. Then her eyes locked onto a detail she'd missed. A patch on one sleeve. It wasn't Department of Corrections. It wasn't STID. It was private security. Crow froze the frame, zooming in until the image pixelated. The logo was faint but recognizable. A shield cut in half by a diagonal line. She'd seen it once before. Years ago, during a federal task force briefing on outsourced detention logistics. A company that officially didn't exist anymore. Blackridge Solutions. Blackridge had supposedly been shut down after allegations of prisoner abuse overseas. Lawsuits, congressional hearings, and then silence. According to public records, the company was dissolved. But according to this video, it had just gone underground. Crow cross-referenced Blackridge with the shell company tied to Mercer's unexplained bank deposits. The connection was immediate. Payments, contracts, a web of LLCs masking something much, much larger. Red Onion wasn't the end of the line. It was the handoff point. Her phone vibrated again. Another unknown number. This time, she didn't answer. A text appeared. You're late. Crow's pulse spiked. She scanned the rest stop. A truck was idling at the far end of the lot. 2 men stood near it, pretending not to watch her. Another message came through. Grant didn't plan on being brave. Neither did Caleb. Crow slammed the laptop shut and started the engine, tires kicking up gravel as she peeled back onto the highway. The truck followed. She didn't panic. Panic wastes time. She took the next exit, then another, heading toward an industrial area near the rail yards. She knew this terrain. She grew up here. She drove like she meant it, weaving through service roads until the truck dropped back, then it surged forward again. Her phone rang. This time, she answered. You don't get to win, Crow said before the voice on the other end could even speak. A man exhaled slowly, calm, educated, unhurried. This isn't about winning, detective. It's about containment. Men are disappearing, she shot back. They're being removed from a system that failed to control them. And Ethan Mercer, Crow snapped. Was he a threat too? There was a pause. Longer this time. He forgot which side he worked for. The line went dead. Crow slammed on the brakes, cut hard into a warehouse lot, and killed her lights. The truck roared past the entrance, missing her by seconds. She sat there in the dark, breathing shallowly, her heart pounding in her ears. They were watching her moves in real time, which meant there was only one play left: exposure. She drove straight to the courthouse, bypassing security protocols she knew by muscle memory. Inside, she found Judge Elliot Bram, a man just weeks from retirement, with a reputation for stubborn integrity. She didn't give him the whole story. Didn't have to. She just showed him the video. Bram watched in silence, his face hardening with every frame. When it ended, he leaned back slowly. "They're using state facilities as black sites," he said. Crow nodded, and erasing the paperwork. Bram signed the emergency federal referral without another word. Within hours, the first domino fell. Federal investigators arrived unannounced at Red Onion. Servers were seized. Personnel were separated. The warden was escorted out in full view of cameras he could no longer control. The news lit up. Secret prison room discovered. Oath book inmate transfers alleged. Federal probe into Supermax facility. For the first time since Caleb Mercer's body was found, the silence cracked. But Crow didn't celebrate. Because that night, sitting alone in a borrowed office, reviewing documents recovered from a wiped server, she found something that made her blood run cold. A transfer schedule. Not past tense. Upcoming. Names. Dates. Locations. And at the bottom of the list, highlighted in yellow, was one final entry. Crow, Lena's status, pending. Her phone buzzed immediately, as if on cue. A ticked unknown number. You should have listened. Crow looked up as the office lights flickered once, then went out completely. Somewhere in the building, a door clicked open. Eh? And someone began walking toward her. The footsteps were unhurried, deliberate. Whoever was walking down the corridor knew exactly where Lena Crow was sitting. She stayed still, one hand easing into her jacket pocket, her fingers wrapping around the small backup drive she'd kept hidden from every inventory list and search. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the hallway in a dull red glow. Long shadows stretched across the floor, bending and warping as the figure approached. Then the steps stopped. A voice spoke from the darkness, close enough that she could hear the faint rasp of breath behind it. You made this mess bigger than it needed to be. Crow didn't turn. Funny? I was thinking the same thing about you. A soft chuckle. Male. Older. Calm in a way that suggested power rather than confidence. You think federal badges change anything? The voice said. This machine existed before Red Onion. Before Blackridge, it adapts. Crow slowly stood, keeping her hands visible. Machines leave records. Only the ones designed to... The figure stepped into the red light. He wasn't wearing a uniform. No badge. No insignia. Just a gray suit that looked forgettable by design. His face was ordinary, the kind you'd pass on the street and never remember. Who are you? Crow asked. Someone who cleans up after idealists? He replied. Caleb Mercer was one. Grant Holloway tried to be. Isaiah Boone thought he could bargain. And me, Crow said. You're a liability. The man gestured subtly toward the door behind her. Crow didn't need to look to know she wasn't alone anymore. This building is empty, she said. Federal seizure. Federal oversight, the man corrected. Temporary. Crow weighed her options. None of them were good. You can still walk away, he said. Disappear. New name. Quiet life. That's more mercy than most get. Crow smiled thinly. You really don't understand why this doesn't work. The man tilted his head. Enlighten me. Because you already lost control, she said. You just don't know where. She pulled the drive from her pocket and held it up between two fingers. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. That's irrelevant, he said. Is it? Crow replied. Because the auto release already triggered. Silence stretched between them. You're bluffing, he said finally. Crow shook her head. I stopped checking in an hour ago. For the first time, something like irritation crossed his face. He turned slightly, murmuring into an earpiece Crow hadn't seen. Confirm. The seconds ticked by, heavy and slow. Crow spoke softly. Caleb Mercer wrote everything down. Dates, names, routes. And when he realized he wouldn't make it out, he mailed copies. He didn't trust digital. The man's jaw tightened. Grant Holloway filmed you, Crow continued. And Boone? Boone memorized schedules. He knew the rhythm, the blackout times. He told other inmates. Enough of them that the silence broke. A sharp buzz came from the man's earpiece. He listened, his face hardening with every word he heard. Across the country, servers unlocked. Emails queued. Journalists received files they hadn't known to ask for. Transfer logs. Financial trails. Video fragments. Photos of Service Passage D, before it was sealed. Names tied to Blackridge that no longer stayed buried. The man exhaled slowly. "You've made yourself very inconvenient," he said. Crow met his gaze. "That's the point." The lights snapped back on suddenly, flooding the hallway in harsh white. Shouts echoed from the stairwell. Footsteps met this time. Federal agents. Armed. Loud. The man stepped back into the shadow as the first agents rounded the corner, weapons raised. "Hands up," someone yelled. But the space where the man had been standing was empty. Only a side door swung gently on its hinge. Later, they would say he vanished in the confusion. No camera caught him leaving. No badge logged his presence. He was never identified, never named, never officially pursued. Just another ghost in a system built on ghosts. By dawn, Red Onion was under full federal lockdown. Guards were questioned. Contractors detained. The warden faced charges. Blackridge Solutions became a headline instead of a rumor. Families of missing inmates began coming forward. So did former employees. So did people who'd been afraid for years. Lena Crow stood on a ridge, overlooking the prison as the sun rose, the mountains painted gold and red. The silence felt different now. Fragile. Cracked. She knew better than to think it was over. Systems like this didn't collapse cleanly. They shed skin. They relocated. They waited. Her phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. "You saved some of them," Crow typed back. "Not enough." The reply came seconds later. "No, but you forced the door open." Crow slipped the phone back into her pocket and turned toward the prison, its walls still standing, still imposing. Inside, men remained locked away, and somewhere beyond those mountains, someone was already planning what came next. The quiet wasn't gone. It was just watching her now. The knock wasn't loud. Just two precise taps, a pause, then one more. The kind of knock that doesn't want neighbors to notice. 3 days. That's how long it took for them to find her. Lena Crow froze in the kitchen of the safe house, her hand hovering over her phone. The U.S. Marshals had sworn this place was a ghost. No names, no paper trail. Just a temporary place to breathe. She didn't answer. The knock came again, identical. Lena moved silently, peering through the narrow window beside the door. A woman stood there, mid-40s, hair pulled back tight. No weapon, no badge. But her eyes. Lena had seen those eyes before. On people who'd survived something and never really left it behind. Lena opened the door just enough to speak. "You shouldn't be here." The woman nodded. "I know." "Then leave." "I can't," she replied, "because they'll kill me if I do." Lena studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside, letting her in. Inside, the woman sat at the table and placed a manila envelope between them. Her hands shook. "My name is Evelyn Marks," she said. "I worked intake processing at Red Onion Prison for 11 years. Lena's chest tightened. "Worked. They let me resign yesterday. No explanation. Just a severance package and a warning to forget what I'd seen." "And you didn't?" Evelyn let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I tried, but then I saw the news. And I recognized the patterns." She slid the envelope forward. Inside were photocopies of intake logs, the real ones, not the sanitized versions sent to Richmond. Columns had been altered, names struck through, entire lines just gone. Every time Service Passage D was used, Evelyn said quietly, someone from intake was ordered to delete an entry. Always the same authorization code? Lena's eyes scanned the pages. Whose code? Evelyn swallowed hard. Not the warden's. Lena looked up slowly. Then whose? Evelyn met her gaze. Federal. The word hung in the air. Evelyn explained how it worked. Red Onion wasn't acting alone. The prison provided the location and the silence. Private contractors provided transport. And federal liaisons Neva, the same name, twice, provided clearance. using emergency directives and national security language vague enough to override everything. It was sold as containment, Evelyn said. The worst of the worst. Men no one would miss. And when someone objected? Lena asked. They were transferred, Evelyn said. Or they quit. Or they ended up like Caleb Mercer. Lena closed the file. How did you survive? Evelyn looked down at her hands. By pretending I didn't understand what I was erasing. That night, Lena forwarded the documents to the task force. The response was immediate and deeply troubling. The files were authentic. The authorization codes traced back to a dormant federal subcommittee that officially hadn't met in years. Someone had been using a dead hand to sign living orders. The next morning, a high-level press conference was announced. Carefully worded promises of transparency, accountability, reform. Lena watched it on the safe house television. The speaker never mentioned service passage. Dee never said Caleb Mercer's name. Never acknowledged the private contractors. It was a controlled burn, designed to smother the truth. That afternoon, one of the marshals guarding the house took a call outside. He didn't come back. By the time Lena realized something was wrong, the power cut out. Darkness rushed in, total and sudden. Lena grabbed her bag and moved Evelyn towards the back exit, but it was too late. A flashlight beam snapped on at the end of the hallway. Don't run, a voice said. It was younger, tighter, nervous. Lena stepped into view, hands raised. The man holding the light hesitated. He wore plain clothes, but his stance was trained. Not local law enforcement. Something else. We're just here to talk, he said. Lena smiled without warmth. That's what they always say behind him. Another shadow moved. Lena's phone vibrated in her pocket. An unknown number. A single message. This wasn't authorized. The man's earpiece crackled. His face shifted from confusion to fear. Wait, he said. I need clarification. The shadow behind him stepped forward. It was the older man from the courthouse. The cleaner. He ignored Lena and fixed his attention on the younger man. You were told to observe, the cleaner said calmly.
Ding.
Not intervene. She's leaking assets, the younger man protested. This is containment, the cleaner raised a hand. That word is losing its usefulness. The younger man went pale. Finally, the cleaner turned to Lena. You're causing fractures, he said. In places meant to remain solid. Lena held his gaze. That's how pressure works. For a moment, she thought he'd order them taken anyway. Instead, he stepped aside. Enjoy the attention while it lasts, he said. Systems don't die. They migrate. And then he was gone, taking the shadows with him. The power returned minutes later. Within 48 hours, Evelyn Marks was in protective custody. 72 hours later, a prison 3 states away reported a fatal transfer complication. Same timestamp, same blackout, different name. Lena Crow stood in front of a wall, covered in photos, maps, and strings, the truth settling heavily in her chest. Red Onion wasn't the story. It was just the prototype. And whatever this was, it was still running. The weeks that followed were a slow-burning nightmare. Lena Crow had hoped the federal investigation, the media frenzy, and Evelyn Marks' testimony would force the machine to stop. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized that Red Onion was just a node in something much larger. Something built to survive exposure. Every lead she followed either went cold or evaporated under pressure. Emails she sent were deleted from inboxes. Phone numbers she'd collected went dead. Even some federal investigators she'd trusted suddenly became unreachable, reassigned, or conveniently disappeared. Crow's nights were sleepless. The images of Service Passage D haunted her. Caleb Mercer in the restraint chair. Holloway's reflection, the scratches in the walls, Boone's last words. Now, knowing what Evelyn Marks knew, she realized just how many people had quietly vanished without public acknowledgement. One morning, Crow returned to the safe house to find another envelope slipped under the door. No return address. Inside, a single, blurry photograph, taken from a distance, of a man being loaded into a blacked-out transport van. A white slip of paper, folded into a corner. Read, "He didn't belong to us. Neither do you." Crow felt her chest tighten. The handwriting matched the messages Caleb Mercer had left behind. The same pattern that had driven Holloway and Boone to their fates now reached toward her. But instead of fear, Crow felt a grim determination. She couldn't stop them entirely. Not yet. She could, however, expose enough to give them pause. She began contacting journalists, feeding them carefully curated documents. Enough to show the pattern without endangering anyone still alive. Blackridge Solutions, Red Onions, D-Passage, the federal authorizations, the missing inmate transfers, all of it. Within days, the story exploded. Public outrage followed. Congressional hearings were called. Oversight committees began digging into operations long thought untouchable. For a moment, it seemed the machine was finally exposed. But Crow knew better. One evening, as she reviewed footage recovered from Caleb Mercer's notes, she noticed a pattern she hadn't seen before. The disappearances weren't random. They were procedural, predictable, methodical. Each problem individual was removed. Yes, but only at precise intervals, rotated through hidden networks. Someone in authority could predict, almost with certainty, who would vanish next. Crow realized the true depth of the system. Red Onion had been a single facility, but the architecture of secrecy was nationwide. Other prisons, private contractors, dormant federal subcommittees, all nodes in a system designed to operate independently, even if one part was exposed. She sat back in her chair, exhausted, staring at the wall of maps and strings. The list of the missing, the schedules, the known contractors. The backup files, everything pointed to a simple truth. Exposure slowed it, but didn't end it. The machine adapted. It always did. And then, her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "You think you changed anything? You just made yourself visible?" Crow turned off the phone. She knew the truth. She had saved lives by exposing certain parts. But other plans were already in motion. Transfers were still scheduled. Men and women already marked were being moved tonight. Right now, in vans with no license plates, through unmonitored routes under the pretense of legality. She leaned back and let the weight settle. The horror wasn't the past. It was ongoing. But there was also a glimmer of something else. Crow had forced cracks into the machine. She had forced oversight, witnesses, and documentation into public hands. She had made the invisible visible, even if only partially. And as she stared at the wall, she realized that some part of her, small, stubborn, alive, had the power to continue the fight. Some doors, she knew, could be forced open. Some silences could be broken. But not all. And for those who remained inside Red Onion and the other hidden facilities, the quiet persisted. The machine endured. And the system learned from every exposure, every mistake, every leak. Crow stood up, stretching her arms. She knew she would never truly leave this behind. The shadow of service, Passage D, the restraint chairs, the scratched names, the disappearances, they would follow her forever. And yet, there was a strange clarity in that knowledge. She had witnessed it, she had documented it, she had survived it. Somewhere, Caleb Mercer's voice lingered in her mind. They don't leave. She knew now that the phrase was true in two ways. The prisoners, trapped in silence, never left the system. And those who challenged it, like Mercer, Holloway. Boone, and now Crow herself, carried its echo for the rest of their lives. She looked out the window at the mountains in the distance, the same ones hiding Red Onion. The sun dipped low, painting gold on the concrete walls. Somewhere inside, men remained in darkness. Somewhere outside, the system moved in silence. Crow knew one truth, above all else. The story wasn't over. It had only just begun, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. 3 months after the hearings, Red Onion State Prison still stood, cut into the mountains, quiet as a grave. Officially, Service Passage D never existed. The concrete wall ceiling, it was now permanent, signed off by engineers, approved by committees, and buried in paperwork. The warden took a plea deal. The private contractor, Blackridge Solutions, a few mid-level players vanished into sealed indictments. And as these things go, the public moved on. Lena Crow watched it all from a distance. She'd resigned from homicide quietly, her badge surrendered without a ceremony. To the department, she was just burned out. To the media, she was a footnote. To the system, she was marked, but inconvenient, too visible to erase, too dangerous to touch outright. So, she lived simply now. Different state, different routines. No fixed patterns. Some nights she slept. Most nights, she didn't. The files she'd released did trigger reforms, task forces, and oversight panels. On paper, everything looked safer. Transfers now required triple verification. Private contractors were reviewed. Committees were dissolved and reassembled under new, friendlier names. But Crow had learned something in the shadows of Red Onion, a lesson no classroom could ever teach. Systems don't stop, they just adapt. The first sign came from a federal audit, buried deep in a quarterly report. It's one paragraph, filled with vague language. It mentioned a newly established higher-risk containment partnership operating under emergency authority. The locations were classified, and oversight was deferred. Crow read that paragraph 3 times. It was the same language, just with a different label. A week later, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a folded newspaper from a small town in the Midwest. Tucked away in the local section, at the bottom corner, was a headline no one else would ever notice. Inmate dies during transfer. Officials cite medical complications. The time of death was listed as 11:41 p.m. Crow closed her eyes. The pattern hadn't changed. Only the geography. She unfolded the rest of the package. At the bottom was a single, grainy photograph, taken through a fence. It showed a transport van parked beside a nondescript concrete building. No signs, no identifiers. On the back, 3 words were written in a familiar, hurried script. They relocated it. She burned the photo that night, watching the edges curl and blacken into ash. Not because she wanted to forget, but because she knew the danger of keeping souvenirs. Somewhere, men were still being erased. Somewhere, silence was still being used as policy. Somewhere, someone still believed they were untouchable. But now, the system knew something it hadn't before. It knew it could be seen. Crow sat on her porch as dawn broke, the sky turning a pale gray behind distant hills. She didn't pretend she'd won. Victories like that don't exist in this world. But she also knew this. Every time the machine moves, it leaves traces. Every time it erases someone, it creates witnesses. And every time it adapts, it grows just a little more fragile. She took out a fresh notebook, the same kind Caleb Mercer had used, and wrote down the headline, the time, the location. One more thread. One more mark against the silence. Inside Red Onion, the light still never went out. And inside other places, newly built and carefully hidden, they never would. The quiet wasn't gone. It was just waiting. And somewhere within it, the truth was still alive, patient, dangerous, and impossible to bury forever. Thanks for watching.